The history of the famous Pan-Hellenic sanctuary and oracle of Apollo at Delphi begins thousands of years ago. Its origins date back to the Mycenaean era, while the final pages in its history were written during the rule of Roman emperors in the 4th century AD. The ever-increasing splendor and authority of the oracle is closely connected to its patron god and famed prophet Apollo. At the site of the oracle, which in the archaic period was called Pytho, worship of the earth goddess Gaia was widespread. Her son was the serpent Python, whom according to Greek mythology Apollo slew, because at the goddess Hera's command he had hunted down his mother Leto, who was in love with Zeus. Afterwards, Apollo took refuge in the valley of Tempe in order to purify himself of the pollution of murder. 8 years later, cleansed and purified, he founded his sanctuary at Delphi. In his newly established temple, Apollo installed Cretan merchants who had been shown the way by a dolphin, a Delphini, as priests. From that time on, the place was renamed Delphi. In antiquity, Delphi was also considered to be the center of the world, the place where the famous navel of the earth was situated. This was because tradition had it that the two eagles whom Zeus sent forth in an effort to identify the center of the earth met at this point. According to what we read in the travel guides, the distance from Athens to the sanctuary of Apollo is 180 kilometers. 2 roads, one by land, the other by sea, lead to the village, which is located on the northern coast of the Corinthian Gulf. However, mountains cut off both roads. The traveler coming from afar encounters a magnificent landscape on the side of Parnassus, one of whose peaks rises to a height of 2,458 meters. The rocky, mountainous mass, a bit like the private Mount Olympus of the god Apollo, we might say, rises imposingly from the valley of Crisa up towards the heavens. The modern village of Delphi is 1 kilometer from the ancient sanctuary. Arrayed in the foothills of the mountain, the site commands the surrounding area. Below it, the Plistos Gorge, the Sacred Plain, and the Corinthian Gulf complete an enchanting picture. In order to reach the sanctuary from the modern village, we follow a mountain road called the Sacred Way. The complex at Delphi was one of the first architectural complexes in Greece, whose planning took into account the character of the site and the route of celebratory processions. Here, the adaptation of architectural form to the surrounding space characteristic of ancient architectural aesthetics found artistic expression, as did views concerning the relations between individual buildings and the totality of structures which compose the architectural whole. Those who visit the archaeological site of Delphi begin their tour from the area of the ancient agora, where shops were installed during the Roman period. There, one could purchase objects connected with the worship of Apollo. The Sacred Way, which led upwards towards the precinct, has preserved its original form, with a width reaching 4 to 5 meters. To the left and right of the Sacred Way were a large number of small buildings, the so-called treasuries. These were small structures in the shape of temples, within which were kept the votive offerings of ancient Greek cities. Apart from demonstrating their respect for the worship of Apollo, they showed off the wealth and power of their donors. The most important of these treasuries, restored by specialists, is that of the Athenians. It was built just after the Battle of Marathon in 490 BC, in honor of the great victory of the Greeks over the Persians. Its metapiece depicted the labors of Heracles and Theseus, as well as the battles between the Athenians and the Amazons. A short way above the treasury of the Athenians, we find the wall which supported the sanctuary of Apollo. This is a genuine miracle of construction technique, built in the 6th century BC. The ancient Greeks inscribed more than 800 formal decrees on this wall, many of which concerned the manumission of slaves. According to tradition, the sanctuary's main temple was built on the site where Apollo defeated Python. The names of the builders of the first stone temple, the brothers Agamedes and Trophonius of Boeotia, belong to the realm of myth, but the building they created was destroyed by fire in the second half of the 6th century BC. Donations were then collected from all over Greece to rebuild the temple. Following a catastrophic earthquake in the 4th century BC, the temple had to be rebuilt once again. The new structure had the form of a Doric peripteral temple, with 6 columns on its narrow sides and 15 on its long sides. The facade of the temple was adorned with works by Praxiteles. In addition to Apollo, the great artist depicted the god's mother, Leto, his sister Artemis, the Muses, Hermes, and Dionysus. In the first part of the temple, which is called the Pronaos, next to a statue of Homer, sayings by the 7 sages of Greek were carved in marble. Know thyself, nothing in excess, moderation is best, hold your anger, most men are wicked, and call no man blessed before his death. At the center of the temple was a large white stone, the navel, or omphalos, of the earth. Once a month, the priestess, the Pythia, would sit on a tripod seat deep within the temple. The Pythia was an unmarried woman between 50 and 55 years of age, who inhaled the fumes coming from a fissure in the earth, and who would chew on laurel leaves and fall into an ecstatic trance. Questions were submitted to her, which she would answer in incoherent phrases, while priests restored the incoherent series, recording it in the form of poetic verses, and providing these as responses to those posing questions. Of course, prophecy, foreseeing the future, was a risky affair, and for this reason, questions directly posed of the type, "Will I manage to do this or that?" were rarely submitted. Normally, people asked what they should do in order to succeed in some goal. In turn, the oracle would answer, "Offer sacrifices to such and such a god," or "Take care to secure the support of reliable men," and so forth. If the goal did not have a favorable outcome, this meant either that the god was not satisfied with the sacrifices made to him, or that the men chosen were not the most appropriate. The oracle bore no responsibility. For visitors to the oracle at Delphi, the ritual began a little earlier. After washing their feet in the sacred waters of the Castalian spring, travelers made their way to the temple. All those wishing to request a prophecy paid a kind of tax, the so-called pelano. This guaranteed them access to the altar so that they could offer sacrifice. As a rule, they sacrificed a goat, while the more affluent sacrificed a bull. They frequently determined from the entrails of the animal whether the sacrifice was pleasing to the god. The theater was built a little way above the temple, in the foothills of precipitous mountain rock. The auditorium, the cavea, of the theater was hewn from stone in the 4th century BC and later restored in the Roman period. The theater held 5,000 spectators, and all the great celebrations were held there, including the important holiday in honor of Apollo's victory over Python. Dramatic and athletic contests were one part of the Pythian Games, which were the second most important in the ancient Greek world after those at Olympia. Of course, the area where the games were held was outside the sacred precinct. The Stadium of Delphi was built between the 6th and 5th century BC and constituted a faithful reproduction of the corresponding structure at Olympia. The length of its 17 lanes was equal to a Delphic stade, that is, to 177.5 meters. Spectators originally sat on earth protrusions on the mountain slope. Later, stone bleachers that could hold up to 7,000 people were constructed. Horse races also took place outside the sacred precinct in the Hippodrome, which was located in the olive groves of the Crisa Valley. Preparation for the Pythian Games, the Pythia, took place near the sanctuary on a small raised platform above the Pleistos Gorge. In the upper section of the gymnasium, which was built in the 4th century BC, there was an enclosed stoa 7 meters wide that protected the athletes from rain or unbearable heat. A little below this, there were structures designated for resting. These had pools for bathing. Next to the gymnasium, at the site called Marmaria, there was a sanctuary dedicated to the goddess Athena. By virtue of its location, just before the temple, it gave Athena, who was worshipped there, the nickname Pronia. Only a few traces of the 5th century BC building are preserved. Nearby is one of the most enigmatic buildings at Delphi. Even today, its use and purpose remain unknown to the scholarly community. This building is called the Tholos. It was circular and had 20 columns, of which specialists have managed to restore only 3. We will conclude our tour of the sanctuary of Delphi at the Castalian Spring. This famous spring, whose waters flow from a fissure in the rocks, is beside the road leading to the Temple of Apollo. The ancient Greeks praised the purity of the waters of the Castalian Spring, which were used in purification rites. They believed that the Castalian Spring was the favored resting spot for Apollo and the Muses, and a place that provided a source of inspiration. Before leaving Delphi, we will take a glance at its archaeological museum, one of the 4 most important museums in Greece. In the 13 exhibition halls of the museum, which was renovated before the 2004 Olympics, over 6,000 objects are on display. For millennia, the narrow strip of land joining the Peloponnese with the rest of Greece created difficulties for the residents of the Peloponnese. Sea travel was the basic means of transport in antiquity, and ships sailing from the Ionian Sea could get to the Aegean only by sailing around the Peloponnese. But there they had to confront the threat of countless pirates and the restless waters of the southern part of the Peloponnese. During antiquity, there were a great many attempts to cut through the isthmus, none of which ended in success. Of course, the ancient Greeks had the idea to construct a stone-paved road, the Diolkos, with deep, parallel channels on which, in case of need, it was possible to drag ships from the Gulf of Corinth to the Aegean Sea. In 1881, solving the problem of opening up the isthmus was assigned to an Austro-Hungarian businessman, István Tör. But he went bankrupt, and a Greek company completed the project in 1893. About 12,000 ships pass yearly through the canal, which is 6,343 meters long and 23 meters wide. The history of Mycenae, the center of Mycenaean civilization, is lost in the depths of time since the first settlements in the area appeared around 2500 BC. Myth has it that Perseus, son of Zeus and Danae, founded Mycenae. Later, the ruler of Mycenae was Atreus, founder of the Atreid dynasty to which Agamemnon, leader of the Greeks against Troy, belonged. Built on a strategically important hill, Mycenae dominated the Argolid plain and controlled all the approaches to it. To a considerable extent, the geographic position of Mycenae determined its power. For 4.5 centuries, Mycenae controlled commerce between Egypt, Syria, and southern Greece. But the descent of the Dorians into the southern region of the Balkans in the 12th century BC had disastrous consequences for the Mycenaean world, and within a very short time, the Acropolis of Mycenae fell into decline. Interest in this mythical civilization awoke around the 16th century, when European travelers visited the city's Acropolis and began to study its remains. In 1840, excavations by the Greek Archaeological Service brought to light the Lion Gate. But the individual whose name is most closely linked with Mycenae is Heinrich Schliemann, who in 1876 excavated an intact royal cemetery called Grave Circle A. The Acropolis of Mycenae was strongly fortified with walls built of enormous stone blocks. Their thickness ranges between 5.5 and 7.5 meters, and their original height reached about 12 meters. The ancient Greeks believed that only the Cyclops, and not mere mortals, could have built such walls. The entrance gate to the Mycenaean Acropolis is made up of 4 monolithic blocks of stone, 3.10 meters in height and 2.95 meters wide. Atop these is placed a block of stone weighing 18 tons. A little higher, a sculpture depicts 2 lions, considered to be the oldest example of monumental sculpture in Europe. Behind the gate on one side, there was a relatively small building used as lodgings by the palace guard. Next to it is Grave Circle A, uncovered by Schliemann. 6 graves belonging to members of the royal family were discovered. A circular protective wall of stone slabs surrounded the graves. The road leading to the peak of the citadel ends at the palace of the King of Mycenae. It is 23 meters long and 11.5 meters wide. In the eastern part of the building was found its most important section, the Megaron. Its floors were covered by gypsum tiles from Crete, and artistic compositions adorned its walls. Of course, a short walk among the remains of the so-called Red Bath, where according to myth Agamemnon was murdered by his wife Clytemnestra, is enough to inspire the imagination. Outside the citadel, the most interesting monuments are the monumental tombs. These were circular, domed structures called tholoi, with a base diameter equal to their height. The most impressive chamber tomb is called the Treasury of Atreus. The entrance to the tomb, dated to the mid-13th century BC, was via a passageway 36 meters long and 6 meters wide. The construction of the tomb's walls is somewhat unusual. Its dome was of stones with nearly straight lines that met only at their internal edges. On the north, a small entrance led to a square chamber. Unfortunately, the tomb had been looted in antiquity, and the only indication of the wealth of the king buried there was his monumental architecture. Mycenae, rich in gold, the center of a magnificent civilization, vanished with the coming of the Dorians. The palace and citadel were burned. Mycenae's art, trade, and writing disappeared. Its powerful kings and their achievements became myth, and their traces were gradually lost. Today, to comprehend the splendor of Mycenaean civilization, one need only visit the Archaeological Museum of Mycenae. The city of Nafplio, built on a height deep in the Gulf of Argos, is considered one of the most picturesque cities in Greece. According to Greek mythology, the city's founder was Nafplios, son of Poseidon, god of the sea. The area occupied by the city today was settled from very ancient times, and its inhabitants, represented by the hero Palamedes, took part in the Trojan War. The long and distinguished history of Nafplio is reflected in its many monuments. First of all, there is the 18th century fortress climbing above the city, Palamidi, to which 857 rock-hewn steps lead. A little below it are the fortification walls of Acronafplia, which bounded the Acropolis of the ancient settlement. The main sites in Nafplio are in the center of the old city, in its Venetian square, later renamed Constitution Square. The archaeological museum is in an old military warehouse built by the Venetians. A large mosque left from the Ottoman occupation became the place where the first Greek parliament convened. Upon the decision of the governor of Greece, Ioannis Kapodistrias, Nafplio became the first capital of the modern Greek state, after the southern part of Greece was freed from Turkish rule in 1829. Only 5 years later, in 1834, King Othan would transfer the country's capital to Athens. Here in Nafplio, in Constitution Square, the first Greek school where students taught fellow students was housed in another Turkish mosque. Its many monuments, its architecture, and its luxuriant vegetation give the city an unforgettable appearance. For all these reasons, Nafplio remains an attraction for tens of thousands of tourists from all over the world each year. The theater at Epidaurus is considered one of the most famous ancient theaters in the world. It forms a part of the sanctuary dedicated to the god of medicine, Asclepius. The theater, which held 12,000 spectators, was built at the end of the 4th century BC by the architect Polykleitos. The first row seats were reserved for honored visitors and were reddish in color. The theater's main parts included the cavea and the orchestra, where the chorus moved, and the slightly elevated scene building, used as backdrop and stage for the actors. The most characteristic feature of the theater at Epidaurus is its marvelous acoustics. The actors were not required to raise their voices to be heard. And if someone standing at the center of the orchestra throws down a metal coin or tears a piece of paper, then the ringing of the falling coin or the rustling of the torn paper can be heard in the top row.